Welcome to the No Snark Zone. This is Jen Frankel. I'm here with Gerald Mackenzie, filmmaker, director of such short films as Condolences and Savior. We'll see if we can pop up some links to those. Jerry, you're a film collector as well as being a filmmaker.
Yes.
When did you start collecting films?
Oh, probably about 20 years ago.
Okay, so your collection, will show people a little bit about what your collection is size-wise. This is a pretty impressive collection of films, and you don't collect the kind of films that most people watch in the movie theaters.
No.
So tell me a little bit about the kinds of films that you really enjoy.
Well, I like a lot of horror films and B pictures, and so a lot of my, even my foreign pictures that I collect are like horror movies and stuff like that, as opposed to classical dramas, although I've got a few of those. And my collection is just organized by country, so I have Canada, the United States, and I have Germany from the different eras, from the Nazi era to the East German era, and I have Russia, well, USSR, and I'm not really interested in films from the new Russia anymore, the Russian Federation, because I find they're just they're mostly macho, don't fuck with us movies.
So are they just trying to copy what they see of American
gangster
pictures?
I think it's their version of what American tough guy films are like. Yes, I think they just happen to take them a little too seriously.
Because I know that East Asia has a big tradition of kind of gangster type films, but they've got a very particular kind of they've got their own feel, don't they?
Yes.
So what kind of films do you like from East Asia?
Well, I have films from a few from Hong Kong and Japan, and I also have some from mainland China.
Okay.
And the ones that I have from Hong Kong are mostly Shaw Brothers martial arts type films, or I think they call them wuxia play films, which are a form of martial arts.
What distinguishes that from other kinds of martial art films?
It's mostly swords.
Oh, neat. I think I could go for that.
And they made a lot of period martial arts films, as well as some really sleazy contemporary movies.
Nice. What would you say are the... Okay, no, actually, so let's go... you were talking about Vietnamese cinema. You're just getting into Vietnamese cinema?
Well, I'm just starting to explore it. A number of years ago, the Toronto Film Festival actually had a showcase highlight of films from Vietnam, and I saw a number of those many years ago, and I can't remember most of them very well, but I remember a couple of them, and I found most of them at the time to be sort of like crude melodramas, but they were very interesting to see things from the other side, because naturally we get the American side of the particularly Vietnam conflict all the time, and this was something quite different.
So politically, how do Vietnamese films actually portray the war in Vietnam? Is that one of the things that they're dealing with?
Well, to them it's a war of liberation. And from their point of view, they've been colonized by the French, and they've been colonized by the Americans, and they were just fighting for what they believed was their freedom. Apparently, Ho Chi Minh at one point thought that the Americans would sympathize with Vietnam's struggles because America was a revolutionary country. They'd been in the same boat
a few years before?
Well, America was formed out of trying to escape British tyranny.
Right.
But apparently the Americans didn't have that long of a memory, or at least the government.
Or they just see other people in a different position than they see themselves.
Generally, yeah. And so you know, the idea of the American side is that they were fighting to liberate Vietnam from communist influence, but they were trying to their side of it is they were just trying to free themselves from colonialist influence.
Right. Tell me about monster movies.
All right, I've got a bunch of Japanese monster movies. Godzilla, I've got a few of those. And Gamera, which was another Japanese studio's response to Godzilla in the 60s.
That was a big lizard thing too?
Gamera is a giant flying turtle.
Oh, that's scary.
I can show you some
pictures. How exactly is a turtle scary and monster-like?
Well,
because
he's just really big, and he's got these two fangs on his on his lips, and or just dye his lips. And actually, the first Gamera movie, he started out as a bad guy like Godzilla, but then immediately he was kind of shoehorned into the kiddie film industry, and he became sort of like a savior for kids, so, against aliens and other weird people. And so they weren't necessarily intended to be scary.
Right. So there was no Gamera Godzilla head-to-head matchup at any point.
No, not really.
Okay, of all the Godzilla movies, what's the best matchup you think that you have?
Well, my favorite, I don't know whether it's the best matchup, but my favorite of the Godzilla movies that I have is Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah from 1994, which is I told you about, is a story about some people from the future who appear in 90s Japan to warn them of a impending nuclear disaster that will be caused by Godzilla. And so they go back in time. The few Japanese people, experts at the time, go back with the time travelers to 1944 and remove Godzilla from the island where he was originally atom bombed. But they replace a little pet of theirs called a Dorat, which is a weird hybrid, sort of genetically engineered pet that they have.
What does it look like?
What's it look like? It looks, it's about yay big. It's got bat wings and it's got goofy little teeth and eyeballs like a Muppet.
So it sounds like it sounds like it would fit right into the like Pokemon universe.
Not quite, but probably.
Okay.
And then they let the Dorat loose and go back to 1944 or 1994. Sorry. And this is an incredibly convoluted plot. And when they get back, they find out that Godzilla is indeed gone, but the Dorat received the radiation intended for Godzilla, and he turned into this big monster that the future people control by microwave, and are now threatening to destroy Japan unless they capitulate. And it turns out that the future people have come back to stop Japan from being a world power and controlling the world. And so Godzilla has to take on King Ghidorah, and they fight it out for supremacy of Japan.
So I take it this wouldn't be a movie that would be all that popular with Americans.
Well, the bad guys are white guys, so generally I think not, no.
That's great. How about let's talk a bit about the European cinema.
Sure.
How did you come across like Occupation France films?
Well, it was just something that I found mostly on websites, and I was just interested in. I'm very interested in propaganda films and narratives, just to see how they use standard narrative film to convince you to certain opinions, which is why I'm partial to very obvious examples like from the Nazis and French occupation. So it was just sort of an outreach.
So you have like Leni Riefenstahl films and...
No, I don't have anything by her. Those are documentaries, but I do have films like Judsus, which is an infamous anti-Jewish movie, and I have one of the last films turned out by the Nazis called Kohlberg, which is a full-color film about the Napoleon's invasion of Prussia.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And slanted to make the Germans look as good as possible?
Well, the idea is that this was a film made in response to Germany losing the war, and they took the story of Kohlberg, which was true, about a town whose citizens stood up to actually fend off the Napoleonic invasion, and they had a siege, and they managed to fight them off long enough for the treaties at Tilsit or something like that between Napoleon and the Russians, I think. And so this basically takes that story and blows it way out of proportion to try and make Gun with the Wind type style movie, only the people are all like everybody's ready to stand up and sacrifice their lives, and you want to burn my house down so that the troops won't be able to use it as a vantage point? Go ahead, burn my house down. And
so really upping the heroic ante for the German people.
And anybody who believes or who is a pacifist is a coward, and not only just a coward, but you're really a malevolent, selfish person. And anybody who thinks differently is also considered to be evil.
And this was made after the Germans had actually lost the war, the World War II?
Hell no! This was
during.
This was made in. It came out in 1945.
Oh, okay.
It came out just before the Germany surrendered.
Wow.
It was part of Goebbels' policy of total war, and as things were coming to the end, they were expecting citizens. It didn't matter if you were an old lady or a cripple or whatever. You were expected to fight off the enemy to the last.
Right. So what Riefenstahl was doing with documentary, they were doing with narrative film as well at the same time.
Well, their films were like Riefenstahl's in the sense that they were propaganda. They weren't staged the same way, and they weren't documentary-like.
But so they were the agenda was, I suppose, hidden a little bit.
In some cases, it was hidden a little more than others. It depends on what point of the war they come from, and when they were kind of getting desperate, it was very clear what the films were all about.
Now, the one under the French, was that actually made by the Germans, or was that made by the French? Or
the Germans established a company in France called Continental Films, which they had certain people in the French industry working on films for the French market. But there were independent French producers who were still able to operate, and the ones that I have, Les Visiteurs ce soir, was actually produced independently, but it was at the time the biggest budget film in France, and
that was a resistance film then, or?
Oh, hell no!
Okay, this was all still.
You didn't make resistance films.
I was wondering if there was any sense that the war was being fought on filmmaker level as well. But basically, at this point, the cinema was entirely in the service of the occupation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they had censors and everything, and in a lot of countries, the governments control the films. There is nothing accidental. There's no hidden protest messages. People have interpreted Les Visiteurs ce soir as a resistance against Hitler,
right?
Because it's a story about a castle that's visited by the devil in the medieval times. But a lot of people have said that that's just stuff that people tend to read in after the fact.
So there's a very much more straightforward message that was the message of the film.
Yeah, it was more about people holding out in strong and difficult times, but you could apply that almost anywhere. You couldn't necessarily apply it specifically to the time in which it was made.
Right.
I mean, I guess you can now, but like I said, a lot of the problem with film criticism is people can read whatever they want into it after the fact. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's really what it was. Like when I was in school, a lot of people tried to say that John Wayne movies were homosexual films.
Right.
But
I think he would have had some things to say about that himself.
Yeah, I think that's just something that people read in because they want to. Well, they get what they want out of it, basically.
Right. Well, and there's always, I think with art, there's always a tendency, and possibly it's a natural tendency to interpret what you see through the lens of your own experiences.
Yeah, sure.
But the filmmaker may not have intended any of that.
That's right.
Now, I would say I'm not alone in not being the world's biggest fan of Canadian cinema. But you have quite a extensive collection of Canadian movies.
Yeah, I've got a few of them, yeah.
So what do you particularly like?
Well, I'm just interested in them mainly because it's my country of origin, and I'm just interested in following, at least to a point. I don't watch the new movies much anymore because I've kind of decided Canadian cinema is a hopeless case, but...
you heard it here first.
Yeah, right.
I was going to say that the opinions of Jerry don't necessarily reflect the opinions of the podcast, but I can't say that necessarily. So what was there a golden age of Canadian cinema?
Well, in the early 70s, there were a few films that came out, which, like Going Down the Road from 1970 by Donald Shabib, was hailed as the first Canadian English film. Like today, it's regarded as the English-Canadian classic. And because it was a film in which, although very low budget, was a film in which there was a distinct Canadian voice. They said the same about one from the 60s called Nobody Waved Goodbye.
Okay, what's that one about?
That's about, from the National Film Board, and that's a movie about a boy who is gets into a fight with his parents and moves out on his own, but finds he has a hard time getting by, and he works in a parking lot, and he has to steal change in order to make money. And
I think we've all been there.
and then his girlfriend gets pregnant and wants him to take her away, and so he steals a car, and when his father won't give him any money, and he steals a car, and when the girlfriend finds out about it, she basically makes her drop her off on the highway, and then he just drives away, and that's the end of the movie.
Wow. So, sounds very existential, actually. What area of Canada was that one set in?
Well, it was made in Toronto.
Cool. What's the classic with Elliot Gould and Christopher Plummer?
Silent Partner.
Yeah.
That was a tax shelter era film.
No, was that actually a Canadian film, or is that?
Yeah, it was Canadian, and it was one of the few that was actually set in Toronto.
Yeah, like recognizably. Like if you haven't seen it, it's the Eaton Centre, right?
Yeah, it's the Eaton Centre and Toronto Subway and a few other locations.
And a great, like a really fun character piece. It's kind of like our Pelham 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, it's basically Elliot Gould is a bank teller who is robbed at gunpoint by Christopher Plummer in a Santa Claus suit, and he decides to help himself to some of the cash, which Christopher Plummer decides he wants, and they basically engage in a battle of wits with each other to try and get. Elliot Gould wants to keep the money, and Christopher Plummer wants to get the money, right. And kill Elliot Gould when he gets the chance.
That was a film I really remember loving and thinking that I'd love for more stuff to be done like that. The George C. Scott Changeling, that was Canadian as well?
Yeah, it was made in Vancouver, I think, but it was set in Seattle.
Oh, okay.
A lot of these films, I would say, are only technically Canadian in the sense that they don't have any Canadian content in them, and they're disguised as American pictures. And so personally, I loathe those kind of films.
Well, it's interesting because you can't really do that anymore. If you're going to get Canadian money, you can't set a film in the States, really.
I'm not
Unless
sure.
it's recognizably Canadian. I'm pretty sure that's the way the regulations work now. So we have a lot of films that are recognizably set in Canada. I don't know, just going way back, The Railroader was a film that I remember from childhood.
Railroader with Buster Keaton?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a short from the National Film Board from 1965.
Yeah, that was a lovely little piece.
Yes, that was very
And that
nice.
was one of Buster Keaton. No, I guess it wasn't one of his last, but he was quite elderly at that time, right?
It was one of his later films, anyway. Maybe not his last, but it's definitely up there.
But that was really fun. If you haven't seen that, it's Buster Keaton taking a handcart, a little motorized handcart from the railway all the way from one coast to the other.
Yeah, that's right.
Basically seeing Canada in fast motion. It's a delightful little film. Thank you, Jerry. That was amazing. Would love to come back and talk to you more about filmmaking and also about your incredibly extensive collection.
Thank you.
Is there anything that you would like to recommend that people might be able to get a hold of without too much trouble, but that you think would really introduce them to the whole world cinema that they're not experiencing?
Well, there's one film that was a movie that got me interested in making films to begin with. It's fairly obscure, but it's available on Criterion Video, called The Last Wave, which is a movie from Australia from 1977 with Richard Chamberlain.
Okay.
And that's a film that got me interested in the world of cinema and the possibilities of it. So that's one I would recommend to people.
Okay, so The Last Wave, you can find on Criterion. Richard Chamberlain, you might know as a star of Foon. And guess what? You don't even have to read subtitles. Thanks, Jerry. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
That's a No Snark Zone for today. Please tune in again for another episode where we'll be talking to another fascinating person who knows fascinating things.